All right, cool. So let's jump back into our practice project, although for the sake of this discussion, you could really use anything you want. Um, Actually, I'm not even going to do that. I'm going to just go ahead into a blank sandbox app. This is just a blank project that I think I created maybe on like week 1 or 2 before we started our shopping app. But you can npm create the latest to set up a blank project if you would like to do so. And have this in the background. I don't think there's going to be anything in here right now. Oops, it's very busted. .jsx. This is garbage. Import app. See if that works. All right, cool. Some better stuff in here. Let's take all this stuff out of the app.jsx for a second. All right. So you may recall already that we've taken a couple of different approaches for styling components with CSS in our other projects. So let's say that I have this blank component here, and this component has a div, and inside of here we have maybe like a piece of text. So the traditional way of styling things that has existed for long periods of time is using a .css file. So we can always write CSS inside of a .css file. We can clear all of this out. We can say my div element, I want to have background red, and my paragraph element, I want to have color. Let's make this orange just so they're flashing. Cool. So we have purple, we have orange. It's very small. There's some CSS properties in the index probably that we should get rid of. Let's clear all this out as well. Cool. So we can style things in a CSS file, and in React, we import that file. This sort of downside of this approach is that any CSS file you write, those rules are applicable globally. They are not restricted to just this component. So if I have this component and in here we make another component, and then let's say we went into our components and made .jsx function, other components, turn paragraph, other text, or export default other component. Now, if I try to use other component in here, we're going to see that the text on both of these is purple. Can zoom in a little bit so it's obvious, but this is purple, at least on my screen, because the property that we apply in our app.css, even though that is not imported by this component, it is available globally. We can see if we right click on the page and we hit inspect and we go into this inspector, we can find this element, which is what our React component has boiled down to. And we can go down here to our rules category, which is all of the CSS rules that apply to a given component. There's nothing on the body, but if I go back to those pieces of text, you'll see that rule we wrote where all paragraphs are purple and all divs have a background of orange. So this is fine, but the way that we get around this with a traditional CSS file is by adding IDs and classes to try and make things as specific as possible. So maybe this has ID of app text. And then in here, we say only my hashtag app text should be purple. So this is still purple. The other one is not. Similarly, we could say any paragraphs with a class of purple text is going to be purple. And down here we say purple text as color purple. We can actually combine these rules if we want the same properties for both selectors here. We can say the app text ID, but also the purple text class should both be purple. And now they're both purple here. So we can do either one. And this is the way we would get around these very general rules. We make them as specific as possible. Well, what if my purple text on one component needs to be slightly different than my purple text on a different component? Maybe they're both purple, but they have separate properties. Well, maybe I need some other selectors to say, okay, this has class purple text, but it also has another class big text. And then I make the font size really big. And then on another one, big text means that the font size is really small. I would say that generally these class names are pretty portable, as long as you keep classes very focused. So a purple text class should make the text purple. It shouldn't also control the font size here. I control the font size as well and say this is 32 pixels. Well, now purple text isn't actually telling me by the name of the class what this is. So if I had text here that I then wanted to give specific properties to only this particular instance, then I need to start writing IDs. Well, what happens when you have like hundreds of different components, each with their own text and their own divs inside of your project? Well, you have to make an ID completely unique across the entire page. That's the point of an ID. There should be no other element on the page that has the same ID. If there is, you should have used a class. So I have to start prefixing my IDs with something really crazy like other component text or first text. And then maybe I have a div here, and this is part of my div. So I have a bunch of stuff, and then I have a comment where I have a bunch of different HTML elements. And then later I have another piece of text that has to have some other properties. So now my ID is other component, second text. And this is just like really disgusting. Does this really mean anything? No, it certainly doesn't tell you what kind of styles this paragraph is going to have. It's just telling you like what is the uniquely identifying property of this. It belongs to other components and the first piece of text. So like this doesn't really help me. It's just a way of creating what I would refer to as a namespace, or just like a way of structuring a name such that I can name anything I want according to that namespace, that set of rules, and it will generally be identifiable. But this is really gross. And it's very hard to make sure that these IDs are unique. And maybe you like wrote an ID a long time ago that is not unique enough. Well, now if I want to create another one, I have to go back and change that ID. It's generally a little gross. You can totally go about all of your CSS like this if you want to. It's not a bad thing. I'm just pointing out a downside of this approach. But this is the traditional approach that we've used in web development since its inception. So certainly it would not exist if it was garbage. And there's lots of simplicity here that I personally really like. So we can also, if we wanted to avoid IDs and classes entirely, we could start writing styles inline. So in traditional web development, that would be giving it a style property and then a string where color is purple. Font size is black or 32 pixels. That doesn't make any sense. React does it a little differently where you specify your class name property. We can't just specify class on this div in this paragraph. This is not like a unique enough identifier. And so in React, we would say class name instead. And then we can provide a JavaScript object, this yellow set of brackets in here, and specify our properties like this. So color is equal to purple. Oh, sorry, not class name here. Class name is what we would do if we wanted to take the string approach, where I have classes, other component, second text. Sorry. There is a style property, which means a different thing than what it would on traditional HTML. And the style is where you specify an object where my color is purple. You'll notice that it gives you some auto completion, which is really cool. So you still get some of the pros of like being in a style sheet where it can identify like this is a valid CSS property that is supported by React. So purple works, font size, 32 pixels. You'll notice in this approach, we don't use hyphens since we can't really hyphenate a variable name or an object property. So we do camel case instead. And React under hood knows how to translate this object into the actual CSS properties and apply them. This is also valid. Problem here is we can't share styles. So the approach with classes, we don't really know how to make this work. This is an object that belongs specifically to this element. If I had 5 pieces of text that all needed to be color purple, well, I'd have to put color purple on each of them. Or do some crazy stuff up here, like maybe I defined my purple text styles in an object and I say color is purple. And then I could like do like an object spread here and say the styles are all of these styles plus the styles in this object up here. You could do that if you want to. I don't know that I've ever actually seen this or tried to do this myself, but just an approach to consider. So, inline stylings can be great. I think it's definitely really helpful if you're just trying to prototype something really quickly, if you don't want to jump in back and forth between files, or if you're just sort of impatient and just want to keep everything visually in one place, or even if you are using CSS files, but you just have like one very specific style that you want to keep here rather than creating like a whole ID for it, which could be a little bit of a hassle. So you can use as much of this or as little as this as you want. We should know both of these already, though. We've done this before. It's part of the base React app. Hopefully, this is not a crazy surprise to anyone. Maybe you learned 1 or 2 little tricks. But ideally, this would not be brand new to anybody. Oh, excuse me. Any questions so far on anything that we mentioned?
No, just following along.
Cool. All right. So let's talk about some other approaches that hopefully will be new starting this week. One approach that we can take when we're creating components here, I'm going to get rid of these folders since they're distracting me, is we can use a CSS module, which fixes the problem of a traditional CSS styling sheet in that nothing is scoped. So let's take out this app.css. If we go into our app, we're going to get rid of this ID. So there are no longer any stylings applied to the text in this app.jsx. Our other component still has all these stylings in them. I'm going to get rid of these 2 just for clarity. All right, cool. So there's nothing here. It's just a bunch of text, nothing special. So if I want to only style the paragraph element here as purple, rather than using a .css file, I can take the approach of creating app.module.css. And the CSS file is where I can specify my purple text class. Or maybe let's, instead of purple, since that's pretty cut and dry, let's do big text, where my font size is extra large, which is a CSS built-in. So it doesn't apply to anything yet because we haven't done anything. but we can import this app.module.css, and we're going to import styles from this file. Since what React is going to do in Vite, it's going to convert this module file into an object, this styles object. And the styles object is sort of what we were discussing with this other component, where it has like color purple and so on and so forth. And so we can go back to that approach earlier where we say, what are the classes on here? Well, this is styles dot big text. I think this is the syntax. Yeah, so now our text is a lot bigger. What does this actually look like? Well, I could console.log styles. We can see what this looks like. This is an object with a property big text. What is big text? It is this class that exists in our module. And get rid of this CSS file. So this is a class that we create, and that class name, big text, even though we didn't apply it directly onto this paragraph by like hard coding this string, it takes all of those classes, puts them into an object where the properties are the names of the classes. And then we're saying, take that string that corresponds to this property, which is a CSS class that's been randomly generated, and apply that onto the item. So now if we click this paragraph, we're going to see that we have this class, big text, and then a bunch of random characters at the end, which has our font size extra large. So like that explanation was probably really confusing. I was trying to figure out as I was going through it how to describe what's going on here. We are specifying a class that has some very easy to read name here. But the module needs to make sure that this name is actually unique to the entire app. So if I took this class here and I went into these other paragraphs and I temporarily say class equal to this same thing, and I hit enter. Now this is also big text. This class does apply to the entire HTML document, but the reason why this works is because the actual like string name of the class is randomly generated by Vite and by React in advance of actually loading up my app. So it did like a hot reload. It compiled all of these classes. It assigned these human readable names to a uniquely identified CSS class, and then stuck all of those uniquely generated things into this styles object. And we're saying whatever that unique identifier is, that is accordance with this big text rule. Stick it on here to class name. So this is a way that you can take these classes and you can sort of modularize them in that they only apply to one component. There are some downsides here. It is a little bit more complicated to say, I want to have this class that applies to many things, this purple text. I think you could probably make this work. You'd have to like, I think you'd have to like make a string interpolation, and you could do like styles dot purple text space and styles big text. And I think this would do both. Yeah, so now we have both of these different classes in here with the space in between. So you can apply multiple styles in here, but they're all classes. So you could apply these classes to any other element inside of this app component if you want to. The other thing that's a little complicated is that everything here needs to be a class. If I specify an ID, some ID, this isn't really how a module works. And you can actually find this some ID in here, but it's not going to behave like an actual ID. Like this is a class that I could apply to as many things as I want. So it's kind of helping you out, but this will not behave as you're expecting if you wanted to just apply this to one component. You could apply this like a class everywhere. And I don't actually know if this works or not, where I say all my paragraph elements, I want to have font weight 900, which is really, really bolded. Okay, so this does work, where this text here has this selector for all paragraph elements of font weight 900. But I think these other ones do too. Yeah, so these paragraphs are from my other component. Over here, this other component, that's where those paragraphs lived, and they're still affected by this rule. So it's not 100% module. The way that we would want to use a module primarily would be for creating these classes where I can create a big text class for my app, and I can create a separate big text class in a different one. So my other component module CSS, I can create big text and say, this one's big, but not as big. This one's only font size 24 pixels rather than this one, which is extra large. Or maybe we'll make this just large instead. And this big text I can apply to here. So now if I say, come on, shouldn't be this hard. If I say my class name is equal to styles dot big text, you'll notice that this one is not showing up on the screen. Why is it doing that? Oh, because there's nothing in there. Okay, so this is big text. It's bigger than the default here, but it's not as big as the extra large text because these big text, even though they have the same English name, they have a different set of uniquely identified characters, and therefore they apply this different rule. So the namespace is a little bit different where it uses this identifier to differentiate them, but we do have the ability to modularize them. I would highly encourage you not to write global styles in a CSS module. Just stick to the traditional approach of if you have a global style, maybe put it in a global CSS file and import that into some component. Just for the sake of discoverability. There's a couple of sort of slip ups around CSS modules that I just wanted to point out to you guys since there are some questions. Questions about CSS modules. I feel like this is usually pretty confusing for people from previous classes. Questions about why we would care about a CSS module. Okay. I cannot speak to the widespread adoption of CSS modules in the industry. I do not work close enough to front-end development to really tell you whether this is a common practice or not. Personally, I think they're pretty useful, but there's also some downsides. They can be a little bit confusing about what you would expect if you were to make a global style or if you were to make an ID. And so maybe that's something that you don't like, and therefore you stick to just traditional approaches. We're already running past this 30 minutes, and I do want to give as much time as possible. I'll stay later than an hour for this, if there's questions. But I just want to like super quickly go through these other three options. These are much higher level approaches to try and make you write less CSS to accomplish the same thing. So these are libraries and frameworks and preprocessors, all just fancy syntax for saying write less CSS that does more. So one thing that I've tried in the past is this thing called Sass. Sass sort of like upgrades the normal capabilities of CSS, and you can do things that you can't do in normal CSS. Personally, I think some of the nicest features here, I personally really like doing this nesting, where in normal CSS, if I want to say all of my nav items that have an unordered list in them, this has to be a separate rule from I have all of my navs with list items in them. Apply this to the list item, apply this to the unordered list, apply this to all the anchors in a nav. Whereas we can sort of nest things here, and it's a very clear hierarchy. It's like reading code, and reading, your nested structures in these components here, where a div has paragraphs inside of it. Well, I want to apply this style to all of the unordered lists in a nav, and so on and so forth. There's also like really complicated things you can do, where maybe you're like writing CSS that you're applying in certain different places, sort of, mix-ins, inheritance. You can do some cool math operations, which are a little bit harder in regular CSS. Um, how useful all of these things will be to you on a daily basis, I don't know. I haven't really tried this out enough to really give you a super informed opinion about whether this is worth your time. But I do think it's really cool. And I found that when I was writing sort of just small amounts of CSS at a time, it did help me work a little bit faster, and help me get a little bit less confused, because I'm not trying to jump around to find like, okay, here's this rule that applies to ULs in a nav, and here's this other rule somewhere totally different that's all the ULs in or list items in a nav, and so on and so forth. So something else to think about. Something else you might hear pretty often is Tailwind CSS. So this is a CSS framework. What framework means doesn't really matter. But essentially what you do is you write classes. In this case, this would be class name for React rather than class. But you can use this in regular HTML or in React or your other front-end JavaScript-y stuff. And these are predefined classes that Tailwind applies just a very specific CSS property for. So this flex class is defined by Tailwind as a CSS class that applies display flex. And when you say this div has class flex, that CSS, that actual property is already written for you behind the scenes. And so you can sort of just declare in your actual layout without having to go to another file, without having to like create this JavaScript object, without creating any global styles. You can apply very specific styles to one element at a time. It's right there in your layout. There's nothing that you have to go find. All of these things are generally very descriptive. If they weren't descriptive, this would be a pointless framework. But I can say from all of these exactly what properties are being applied. This is the flex direction column property, which is to say when you're arranging items, arrange them in a column rather than in a row. This centers all of the items. This creates a little bit of gap. This is probably a margin between the items. This is padding. This is the flex direction. But if my screen size is only medium rather than large or extra large, then we're going to arrange things in a row instead of a column. And if our screen size is medium or smaller, then we're going to have a smaller gap, or actually a bigger gap than over here. And then same thing here, rounded. This is corners. So extra rounded corners. I think I actually might have this wrong. I think this means that medium or higher is a row, and then less than that is a column. I haven't used this in a while, and so I cannot prove that for you either way. But this is a really cool feature that I like about Tailwind, where you can very easily specify at a particular screen threshold that you don't have to actually measure in pixels yourself. When I have a really big screen or a medium-sized screen or a really small screen or an extra small screen, I want to apply these different styles instead. Be aware, this is also something where it's sort of confusing if you want to apply lots of styles that are common across different elements. and shared between a lot of different elements. One of the assumptions that Tailwind makes is that you're going to create components that get reused more often than CSS properties are going to be reused. So if I create a component that has two pieces of text and then I reuse that component a lot, it doesn't matter if I have a reusable CSS class. I don't really need it. I just specify all of these strings in here. And then the last category of things to talk about here are component libraries, where these are React components that have already been completely styled for you. The one that I use most frequently is Material UI. You just plug and play. It is a fully functional component, and you can hook your code into the component according to their APIs. So if I look for a particular component that I want, maybe I'm looking at MUI core in the docs. I can find these components that I want. I want an autocomplete, so a search box that I can type into and it's going to complete it for me. If I created this component, this would take me a long time, but it's already pre-styled. Everything's ready to go. Highly encouraged looking at component libraries if you're trying to get something up and running really quick. This is another option people use fairly often, Bootstrap. It works very similar to Tailwind, where you have these predefined classes that you can apply to your elements. So maybe I have like a form here and it's already pre-styled for us. These are components that we can apply and have ways that we can hook into these components with our code. Lots of cool stuff in here to explore. I'd encourage you to look at all of these. They're all listed in the agenda. Maybe try some out for a little bit, see how you feel. There's no correct approach here. It totally depends on preference. I find myself using different approaches depending on the scale of my project or how much of a hurry I'm in. There's lots of things to consider. Questions about anything else CSS related before we move on? All right. Hearing none, I'm going to retire this topic. I'm sorry for going over. All right. The rest of the time, I am an open book. I would like to answer as many questions as you may have about the rest of this course, about continuing in CTD after this course. I've been a volunteer for the practicum groups. I've been around apprentices before, even though I haven't officially helped with that class yet. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about the rest of CTD. I'm also happy to answer questions about my career, what I've done so far, how I got to my current position, what I do, what my industry is like, any questions you might have around that, or something that I haven't mentioned yet that you're curious about. I am an open book. Nothing is too personal. I cannot promise that I can give you a perfect answer that describes the entire industry. It is a very big industry. I am very new. I have been working professionally for like maybe 3 years combined. I'm not an expert at everything, but I hope that I can at least provide some insights based on what I've seen. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. People are going to have different opinions here. But with that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to open the floor if anyone has any questions.
Could you please give us like an overview of what your personal experience was, like job hunting and actually getting through to being hired?
Yeah, absolutely. So preface this with my current position is not focused on web development. If you are looking for a position specifically around front-end web development, I do think they exist, but most, at least in my opinion, most of the jobs that you're going to find are general computer science programming positions. They don't necessarily say you are going to work on web development. But those do exist. So it can be helpful to be well rounded in other skills, and I hope that you will pick some up. I'm going to describe a sort of general computer science, software engineering role rather than something web development specific, since that is my job. With that out of the way, um, my first working experiences were taking computer science classes in college. I have a bachelor's degree in computer science, which can be helpful, but is certainly not a requirement in order to work somewhere, especially if you have a different degree in something mathy or engineering, or if you find a position that doesn't care about it, which plenty exist. Um, so I was enrolled in a 4-year program, and around my second year, I was applying for internships, entry level experiences, and was resoundingly rejected. At least through the college pipeline, companies are very interested in people that they can immediately hire the year after, or someone that is just like the most genius you've ever seen in your life, and they want to hold on to them for a couple years so that they don't go to a different company. I'm not that smart. I think I'm a pretty smart person, but I'm not that smart. So, um, I, being, still 2 years away from graduating, I did not have a whole lot of luck. Um, I applied to a lot of different places. I think I heard back from one, which just happened to work out. I applied to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Florida for an application development internship, which could mean anything, application development. Um, And I did not have a technical interview for that, which for a software engineering role is very uncommon. Um, but for what they were looking for person and some technical background, but not proving that I can necessarily solve an algorithmic problem, which I really appreciated. I don't think I could have done that at the time, even if I wanted to. Um, so I worked for a summer, a couple of months, doing React development, which is why I'm here in the first place. And I really, really love JavaScript, and I sort of made that my focus for the next year or two of college. Um, the year after, I applied for more internships as a junior, which is the year that you're most likely to find success, and had a couple of opportunities to interview. I would say maybe like two of them didn't go anywhere. Two of them were pretty successful. And then the one that I found that happened to work out was also the best option that I could have had. Um, but there will be interviews for software engineering roles where you have a phone screening, you have like an online assessment that you have to do with a couple of algorithmic problems, which is always a crapshoot. They give you a bunch of really hard ones. Sometimes you get ones that you do know how to do, sometimes you don't. If you don't get through the online assessment, that doesn't mean you're stupid. It means you got unlucky. Um, but I made it through that. I got to an actual in-person technical interview. I say in person, it was over Zoom, um, with a couple of people working at the company. That will look different depending on the company you're going to, how long, how many rounds, what you're actually doing. Um, I had an interview where it was a 2-hour problem of designing a system where you had to sort of justify why you were designing it a certain way and then start to implement it. I personally really love that. I think that was better than you have 40 minutes to solve this small algorithmic problem. Do it again, do it again. So that's what worked out for me. I think it's going to be different for everyone, what companies you're applying to, just based on your experiences, what you're looking for, what the job is looking for. Your actual interviewing experience will be different. I would expect for a front-end development job, you are going to be getting a technical interview, but it is not going to necessarily be just a bunch of algorithmic questions. And I think also as you get older, the likelihood of you getting a bunch of algorithmic questions is probably lower, um, just because that is how they assess people coming out of college who don't have any industry experience yet, um, whether they can just do something. But if you're applying for a specific position for React development or a specific technology, you will get an interview around that technology. I have had a couple of those around JavaScript. So knowing, being comfortable writing JavaScript, working with React, understanding the ins and outs of how React behaves in certain scenarios, that will be, in my opinion, the more useful thing to you guys. Does that answer your question well enough? Anything that I didn't cover that you'd like to know?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Anything else?
Haley, since you mentioned about during your interview, like does projects really boost up your resume to get an interview? Like, yeah, I'm just like kind of, I'm like still in early stage and probably not that much technical expertise or skills, and also not much projects. And I'm hoping to get to find some internship. Yeah, can you talk about like does project actually um really like very big part for your resume to be at least accepted?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, I would say that the important thing when you are applying to a job is that you can demonstrate through your resume and then in person after that you are technically qualified if it's a job that has specific technical requirements. So if you're applying for a job that is in a particular language and you apply and you can't prove that you know how to use that language, they're going to reject you. A resume screener is going to see you didn't list anywhere that you have this language. Why should we even proceed with this? The languages on your resume and technologies are pretty easy to identify, like, is this a good fit for me? Generally, if you're applying for like an entry level or an internship, they're not going to have those requirements just because uh, like they don't expect you to come in with tons and tons of years of experience. A more senior level position probably would have like you need to have done this for at least 3, 5, 10 years. So, in my opinion, the way that you can prove and the way that hopefully they expect you to prove that you are a competent person who has technical experience doing at least something and is motivated to work on programming projects is by demonstrating that either you have had these jobs that have done certain things, or if you haven't been in the industry yet, by saying these are some projects that I have worked on, and maybe providing a link to either the GitHub where that project lives, or if it's something that they can view online, providing a link directly to it so they can see what you're working with. Does not have to be like a business that you created on your own, especially if you're applying for something where you want a React position. You should be showing projects where you have employed React to do things, whether that be I have a portfolio site, come look at it, or I created an application that manages classes. It's like a content management system, and definitely put that. The more interesting the project and the more you can demonstrate in your, especially in your resume, um, like what the project is, what you use to accomplish it, um, why it's cool and why people should care, that's awesome. Once you get to a phone screening or an in-person behavioral interview rather than a technical interview, you will probably be asked questions about, tell me about a project you worked on that did X or made you feel Y. Or you have a behavioral interview, which is saying, just tell me about a time that you were really stressed or that you had a conflict with another person and how you resolved it. And being able to say, I worked on these projects, maybe with another person. So if you move on to do practicum after this, you're going to be working on a pretty large React application across 5 or 6 people. You're going to have a lot of really cool experiences that you can talk about to people in a behavioral interview. And also, you put that on your resume. So I do think projects are important. I think they're more important when you're starting off to prove that you can do something and that you are a self-starter and you are interested in learning. I think as you probably progress, the individual projects that you've worked on your own time are less important. They can still be useful for answering a behavioral question, but your resume is going to get dominated by experience working on teams for organizations and these skills and these sort of like bullet points about what did you do in that organization. I'm personally not there yet. I can list like maybe 2 bullet points about professional experiences, and the rest of my resume is projects that I've worked on. I would say quality over quantity. You don't necessarily need to create like a whole Amazon platform to make it work. But you should be creating things that either teach you something that you can put on a resume that's like, oh, that's really cool that she did that or that he did that. And not something like, oh, I put this together in a day and it's mostly garbage. It just kind of works. Personal opinions. Reminder. Does that answer the question?
Yes. And follow-up question.
Okay.
So if you got into the resume screening and then you got into a technical interview, how much understanding of data structure, software design, and algorithm does recruiters usually want to know for an entry-level job?
That is a great question.
Especially for those who, self-learn. So I don't really know like what is the benchmark that
Yeah.
I can start applying and then expect I should get around, should be good enough to compete with, other candidates.
Yeah. I would say it depends on a couple of different factors. I think the more prestigious of a company you go to, the more demanding the requirements are going to be in order to stand out. So if you go to apply to Google, you will be asked the hardest algorithmic questions that they can come up with. And I honestly don't know if I could pass that interview. Maybe like a very low percentage of the time I would get lucky. But those things are hard and they require a lot of practice on sites like LeetCode, just for something else to think about if you're interested in doing algorithms and data structures. There's lots of sites like this. HackerRank is another one. There's plenty of others that you can choose from, whichever one you like. If you are looking for a position at maybe a less prestigious company, somewhere a little bit more local, they are probably less likely to ask you algorithmic questions and more likely to ask you questions about experiences or proving that you know a technology that they need. So an entry-level position could be a little bit of both, where you need to prove that you are a competent thinker and a competent programmer, but not necessarily prove that you know specific languages and technologies because maybe they don't expect that. But additionally, algorithmic and data structure questions, I think, are more important if you're going into a general software engineering role. If you're looking for a role that is a specific technology, it is much more likely that they ask you questions to prove that you are comfortable with that technology. So I would expect an interview for a React position much more than an algorithms and data structures interview to be an interview of, when I do this, how does this work? Like, what is the expected result of making a component that does X, Y, and Z? Maybe they're going to ask you a question about, like, if I do a use effect, how can I write a cleanup function for that use effect? And when would I want to do that? And you would say, you can write a cleanup function by adding a return statement to that use effect. And in that function, you clean up any subscriptions that you made to a service that's sending you data constantly, or anything that you want to undo that you did at the start of the page loading up. Those, it's just a random example off the top of my head. If you didn't know that, that's totally fine. But those are the kinds of questions that you might get. If I write this code, is this going to work? Is there a bug? What is the bug? How would I do this correctly? Questions like that, I think, are a lot more common. I've done some interviews like that before, just around general JavaScript for a company rather than doing in-person algorithms and data structures questions. But personally, I have more experience in technical interviews doing some algorithms and data structures since that's what I applied to. So it's going to depend a little bit on where you're going. A more prestigious company that puts a higher emphasis on those algo and data structure questions, you're really, really, really going to have to put in the work to make it work. Like you should be doing, according to like a plan, you should be doing as many questions as you can. I don't know if that's worth your time, depending on where you're trying to go. So don't feel like you have to start grinding out leak code unless you know that's what you want to approach. And I don't think CTD is necessarily gearing people up for this, but it is something to keep in mind in the back of your head.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Other questions? We're about to be at time, but I'm happy to stick around as long as people want, since I'm giving really long answers. I apologize. Feel free to type down some questions as well if you don't want to unmute. Do you guys have any questions about like CodeTheDream beyond this course, or like next steps that you want to take after you complete this course? Just to come up with some specific examples. Okay, so we have a question. Can you talk about the process of the apprenticeship at CTD? So you guys are currently in one of the advanced classes. You can take the Node class or the Ruby on Rails class at any time, or the upcoming Python class if you want to. That does not stop you from moving into the practicum after this class if you want to do it, where you will have 8 weeks and you'll get together with a couple of students from this React class and a couple of students from the Node class and work on a full stack web application over the course of 8 weeks. It'll be pretty big. It'll be a lot more complicated than what you're doing right now with your to-do app. You'll learn a lot from it. You will have mentors that can help you sort of deal with the new challenges that you're experiencing and working with the team and talk about their own experiences. It's a super rewarding experience as a mentor from the couple of times that I've been involved. After the practicum is finished, you will rate yourself and the rest of your team. Rating is the wrong word. You will provide feedback about your experience in the practicum, as well as your experience with your other team members. What did they do well? What did they do less well? What could they improve on? What were some challenges you had? I don't know exactly what the questions are in that form. That form is required to be considered for apprenticeship. So apprenticeship is someone who has completed practicum. And if you fill out that form, you will be considered for an apprenticeship. You will be emailed a coding assessment to show the CTD staff what you have learned in your language, in your skill, React. It is not like an algorithm and data structure question. It is not anything that is unsolvable. It is to prove that you got something out of that class and that you are willing to put in time to learn, which I think most of you are absolutely in that category. If you're here, you're willing to learn and approach new subjects. So you complete the assessment. Your mentors in the practicum group will also complete a review of each member of the group, including the members of the other side of things. So I was a React mentor. There was a separate mentor for the Node students. And we rated our whole group of 5 people. And we talk about like, did you demonstrate ability to do these really important common things? How did you perform with the group? We will give you positive and negative feedback for things that you can work on, things that you did really well. And then we will provide a recommendation for what your next step should be. So there's lots of different options. We select any of them that seem like they would be a good fit for you. The options are start applying for entry-level jobs, do practicum again to get some more experience creating projects and working with the team, do practicum again, but as a group leader rather than as just a developer, or take another advanced class to broaden your skill set, or work on your behavioral skills, or in some cases, like, you know, go back to do this class again because I don't think that you've demonstrated that you are competent in React skills. I have never, ever chosen that one for anyone. If you get to practicum, if you get through it, you have probably demonstrated that you know what you're doing. And based on all of the feedback from your mentors, from your peers, and based on whether you completed your assessment, the CTD staff is going to choose a selection from all of the practicum students that are finishing their practicum at the same time and take a subset of them and offer them apprenticeships. It is not everybody because there's just not space for everybody, but it is a very large percentage, I believe. I have not yet worked with a group of students where the majority or all of them were rejected. There are positions in the apprenticeship. You should not think I am not in the top 1%, so I'm not going to get it. But even if that does happen, you have already completed a really big project you can put on your resume. You can talk about skills that you can work on, and you are absolutely ready to start applying for entry-level jobs as well. I think practicum is the most important to complete. And to Stephanie's point, we'll give you a really good project that you can put on your resume. And then from there, if you want to move towards the apprenticeship, you certainly can. You can do all of those steps. If it doesn't work out, don't be discouraged. You can do another practicum if you have the time and the ability to do that, and reapply afterwards. Just because you were rejected does not mean that they're going to reject you the second time. It's a totally different scenario, and you'll be more experienced. You'll be even more in a position to get an apprenticeship. Or while you're doing all this, you can continue applying for jobs. Up to you guys how you want to take it. But that is generally the path towards apprenticeship. You're welcome. Other questions while we're here? All right. Don't hear anything right away, and we're over time. So I am probably going to call it here. As a reminder, please make sure you fill out this attendance form so I can do attendance for this session before you go. I really appreciate all of you guys coming back week after week. It's really exciting for me to always have a really big group of people that are clearly really interested in learning really cool stuff. It motivates me to come up with like interesting things that we can do over the course of an hour, even though it is a good amount of work sometimes to put them all together. And I'm always happy when it's clear that people are really, really interested in the material, because that's what I love. I love just sharing cool computer sciencey things with other people. That's what makes me happy. So as we said earlier, I will be around. I will be in a different time zone, but I'm not like dying or anything. So if there's questions that come up, if there's other career things that you want to talk about as the rest of this class finishes up, please always feel free to reach out and I will get back to you as soon as possible. But it's been a pleasure to have you guys. I really appreciate it. And hopefully I'll see you around CodeTheDream for a while still. All right. Good night, guys. Have a good weekend. Good luck with the rest of your course. And I will talk to you guys another time.